The financial calculator is a great friend. It's a great tool. That's the most important thing that we're going to emphasize throughout the course. It is a tool. It can do calculations. It can do computations faster than we can. But it's not a black box. It's not magic. And so it's really important to understand why what we're giving it with the inputs is leading to the outputs. And therefore, when we're trying to solve problems, we can say this is how we'd approach it. Let's let the calculator do the computations for us. So again, when you're doing a problem, take the words and turn it into a timeline. Basically, you've got words to a problem. Make sure you understand it. And a timeline is a very, very, very important part of working through problems to make sure you understand the problem. Then, what do we know? What do we want to know? Really understand exactly what's going on. Then, can the financial calculator be used as a tool to help us know what we want to know? So, can we use the calculator? Can it do some computations for us to help us answer the question? And then finally, we use the financial calculator. A lot of times students will come to me and start wanting to just push buttons in or push numbers in, push buttons that they see in a problem. It's important to go through the process, and then finally you know what you want to do, and then you do it. So again, it's not about memorizing which buttons to push. It's not a class like that. It's about problem solving. So again, we're going to support the TI-83 Plus, and it's also got a bunch of cousins. These are nice calculators. They got a real big screen, and they will easily show all the inputs that are relevant. But there's a lot of financial calculators that can be used, and if you have one of those, that's fine. TVMcalcs.org is a real good website to highlight how you would go ahead about doing some of the things we're going to explain as far as how they're done with the TI-83 Plus. Again, the calculator is a tool. It's not about, here are all the amazing things a calculator can do. There's only a few functions we're going to support. There's only a few functions we're going to describe. And they're really because they can do a faster job doing some of the computations, a faster job than we can do using more traditional calculator functions of adding and subtracting and multiplying. And so the basic idea is that there's 5 variables in a time value of money relationship. You enter all of them in your calculator except for one, and then the calculator says, okay, given the 4 you've given me, this is what the value of that 5th one has to be in order for a relationship to hold. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of what that relationship is, but that relationship lends itself to identifying and answering some really relevant and common questions that arise in finance. So here are the 5 variables. The first is just N. It says the TI-83 buttons in parentheses. They're actually in red. So the TI buttons are in red. So the first is N, and there's actually 2 purposes, and we'll discuss that. One is the number of periods kind of between the beginning of the analysis and the end of the analysis. The second is if we have a cash flow that makes, or an investment or an asset that makes regular cash flows of a fixed amount, and is the number of those. We'll talk about that. At the beginning of our analysis, which we call the reference point, it's often today, not always, PV helps capture that. Often there's a value at the end of the analysis that's captured by FV. The period interest rate or return is I%. And one of the important things is that the calculator, when you tell it I%, it knows it's a rate or a return. So if it was 2.3%, you wouldn't enter it in as 0.023. You would enter it in as 2.3. Calculator knows if you're saying it's I%, that the number you're giving, just put a percentage sign afterwards, and boom, you've got it. And finally, there's PMT. That is if you have a asset or a cash flow. Often loan payments or some investments will pay you regular fixed amounts, And if you put payment in, it captures those regular fixed amounts. So those are the 5 variables. You put in values for 4, you can solve for the 5th, and it helps us get lots and lots of important things that arise in finance. One of the things that makes it challenging is that financial calculators and Excel as well, and any kind of spreadsheet, is there's a special sign convention. So I mentioned that there's this relationship with all 5 variables. It's an equation. So you really need what it captures is the value of inputs equals the value of outputs. So you need some negatives and some positives. And so sometimes the sign that you put into your calculator or that comes with a number that you solve for is really the opposite of what you're trying to capture. And so we'll talk about that and work through it as we do examples, and the more you work on it, the more you'll understand it. Again, it can be confusing, but the more you use it, the more clear it becomes. And again, one of the reasons why we emphasize lots and lots and lots of practice problems. So here's the sign convention. All cash outflows have a negative sign. So outflow is from the perspective of the person that you're analyzing it for, the company that you're analyzing. If they have to spend money to buy something, it would be negative cash flow. The second part, and this is where it gets a little bit more confusing at times, if you're at the start of the time frame being analysis, the very beginning of your analysis, suppose we already own an asset, we already have an investment, we already have money in our account. When we enter that into our calculator, we enter it in as a negative number. Way to think about it is, okay, I have $100 in my bank account. How did it get there? At the beginning of the analysis, I put it there. It was a cash outflow. And so in this case, the number that we're going to enter for PV is actually going to be the opposite of the value. So in this case, if we had $100 in our account, we would enter it as negative 100. How did we get the 100? We put it in. Cash inflows have a positive sign. So if I am looking at a situation where I'm going to be receiving money, or the firm is going to be receiving money, that would be entered as positive. So if I'm going to get $100 plus, I just entered as 100. If we're at the end of the time frame being analyzed, the end of our analysis, and we have an asset and there's some value, that number that's either entered by us, if it's something that we need to put in order to solve for something else, or if it's what we're trying to solve for, so it's a number that's produced, it would be a positive number if it's the value of something that we own. And so again, we own, the way we can think about it is at the end of the analysis, we have an asset, we have an investment, the analysis is done, we could sell it, that would give us cash. So therefore, PV is the opposite. FV will reflect the actual value of the asset, the security, or the investment. One of the things you want to do is to make sure that you can display an adequate number of decimal places. So if you press mode, you can go in there and make sure you want to make sure you're at float, and then enter, second, and quit to get out of there. One of the things we want to do is make sure that the rate is the rate for the period of the relevant length. So if we're looking at quarterly, we give it quarterly interest rates, we give it a quarterly rate. We want to make sure that the analysis treats it as quarterly, if it's annual, if it's monthly. And the way we get at that is by setting PY and CY equal to 1. And a lot of times that will be left off the solutions. In this class, PY and CY are always 1. So when that payment is equal to 0, meaning we're looking at a situation where we don't have these regular interim fixed cash flows, it doesn't matter what mode we're in. So there's 2 modes, end and begin, and we're going to talk about those later in the course, that make that when payment's not equal to 0, it has an effect because it tells the calculator when those payments start. But if payment's 0, so there's no regular payment, then it doesn't matter whether we're in end or begin mode. The calculator will work with PV and FV the same way in either mode. And so for part of, as long as payment's equal to 0, we're not going to be concerned about the mode because we don't need to be. Later, that will become quite relevant and we'll discuss it. So when we want to look at future value in the calculator, this is how it works. So you've got an initial investment, or you've got a value of an asset or investment at the beginning of your analysis. You put the opposite of that in as your PV. So again, if we have $500 in our account and we want to know the future value of that $500, we enter it in the calculator as minus 500. How to get there at the beginning? We put in 500. We have something worth 500. How do we get, this piece of art that's worth 500? We invested 500. We paid for it. We shelled out 500. I percent, you give that, that's the rate per period. N is the number of periods. So we're going to want to solve for future value. N is the number of periods that we want to know the future value. So if we have $500, we want to know how much it'll be worth in 8 years. And we have a rate per period, and let's say it's 8% per year. 8 years from today, which we said is when we want to know, is 8 years. So N would be equal to 8. And then this would, if we put in this and it compounded by I percent for 8 periods, it would just be 1 plus I percent to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In this case, we're going to set payment equal to 0 because there's no regular interim cash flows. The mode's irrelevant, and now we're ready to figure out what the future value is, and we'll do that by solving for FV. And we'll go in, and I'll show you in a second how we actually solve for FV. It will give us the future value. It's basically saying if we put in PV at time 0 and earn I percent for N periods, solving for FV tells us how much we would get back from the bank, or how much we would get back from our investment. So how do we put in all these numbers? How do we figure out what FV is? Well, first of all, how do we even get into the proper place is in your TI-83, go to the TVM solver application, press the apps key, then you'll press 1, it'll give you finance applications, and then 1 for TVM solver. If your numbers are different, you would not have 1 and 1. For each of the places for each variable, so when you go ahead and do that, you'll see N equals, I percent equals, PV equals, payment equals, and go in and put all the numbers that you want. Then you move, and you can move with arrows. Then you go move the arrow to the place where you want to solve for. In this case, that's FV. You press alpha, which on a T83 Plus is a turquoise key. Then you press solve, which is actually the enter key, because if you press that alpha, the turquoise key, it will, and any button you push, it'll give you the what's indicated in turquoise, that's kind of to the top right. So if you hit enter, you can see it says solve, and it will go ahead and solve and give you the FV. So here's an example, and you can see you can do it either way. You have $30,000 today. You can earn 6.1% per year, and you want to know how much you'll have in 4 years. Well, it's pretty straightforward with the formula. 30,000, 6.1% per year for 4 years turns to $38,017.43. So 30,000 times 1.061 captures what you have after 1 year, times 1.061 after 2, times 1.061 after 3, times 1.061 captures what you'd have after 4. If you wanted to use the financial calculator, so press apps and then 1 and 1 to get in the TVM solver. Payment mode, which is at the very bottom where it says end and begin, doesn't matter, so it can be in either one. You want to set N equal to 4 because we want to know how much we'll have in 4 years. I percent, it's 6.1%, so for I percent you type in 6.1. PV, you have 30,000 today, but nonetheless you type in negative 30,000 and don't type in any commas, so type in as negative 30,000. And again, the calculator says you're putting in 30,000. You're going to be earning 6.1% for 4 years. Set payment equal to 0 because there's no other interim payments. And now we're going to solve. So you move the cursor to the space after the FE equals alpha and solve. And the calculator will come back with that as FV, telling you that if you put in 30,000, 4 years later, if you earn 6.1%, you'd have $38,017.43.